the night the snow buried the railway tracks. Clara Bell believed she had run out of miracles. She stood beneath the crooked awning of a tiny mountain station, holding a telegram so tightly that the paper had begun to tear between her fingers. There was only one sentence on it. "Your mother has asked for you. Come before morning." Clara had read those words so many times that they no longer looked like language. They looked like a countdown. Her mother had been sick for months, but Clara had been told she was improving. She had believed it because believing anything else was unbearable. Now the station master was shaking his head. "No more trains tonight. But I have to get to St. Orla. The mountain line is closed. My mother is there." "I know. Please. I am sorry, Miss Bell." Those 3 words were almost enough to destroy her. Clara looked down the empty railway line. Snow moved across it like white smoke. She had no carriage waiting outside. No horse. No money for a private driver. And the single friend she had called had stopped answering her messages. Her mother's village was more than 60 miles away. 60 miles through a mountain, past that was already disappearing, beneath the storm. Clara lowered herself onto the wooden bench. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. She had spent most of her life believing tears were something that happened to weak people. Her father had taught her that. "Stand straight," he used to say. "Keep your voice steady. Never let people see you break." But tonight, there was nobody left to impress. She buried her face in her hands. Then she heard the sound of a bell. Not the station bell. A small brass bell. Clara looked up. An elderly man was walking toward her through the snow. He wore a long brown coat, a wool cap, and boots so old that the leather had been repaired with strips of cloth. Behind him was a narrow wooden sled. On the sled sat a boy of perhaps 10 years old, wrapped in a red blanket. The old man stopped when he saw Clara. "Are you waiting for someone?" Clara tried to answer. Her voice failed. The boy looked at her. "She's crying." "I can see that, Thomas." The old man looked at Clara again. "What happened?" Clara wiped her cheeks. "My mother is dying." The old man didn't offer one of those empty expressions people gave when they didn't know what else to say. He simply asked, "Where is she?" "St. Orla." He looked toward the mountains. "That's a dangerous road tonight." "I know." "You have transport?" "No." "Money?" Clara shook her head. The old man was silent. Then he looked at the boy. The boy looked back at him. Something passed between them. An understanding Clara didn't recognize. The old man turned to her. "Get on." Clara stared. "What?" "Get on the sled. You can't take me all the way to St. Orla." "No." "Then where?" "As far as I can." Clara looked at the old man's worn boots. "You don't even know me." He smiled sadly. "Neither did the person who once helped me." "Who?" "My wife." Clara didn't understand. The old man adjusted the blanket around the boy. "She taught me something." "What?" He looked directly into Clara's eyes. "Never ask what a desperate person can give you before deciding whether you can help." Clara swallowed. Then she climbed onto the sled. The old man pulled it away from the station. The boy moved over to make room. Clara sat beside him. The little boy studied her. After several minutes, he whispered, "Are you really going to see your mother?" "Yes." "Before she dies?" Clara looked away. "I hope so." The boy nodded. "My father said goodbyes are important." Clara looked at the old man. "Is he your father?" The boy nodded. "His name is Samuel." The old man laughed softly. "And yours?" "Clara." The boy held out his hand. "Thomas?" She took it. His fingers were freezing. Clara squeezed them gently. And as the sled disappeared into the snow, she had no idea that the 2 strangers carrying her toward St. Orla were about to become part of the greatest secret her family had ever kept. She also didn't know that before sunrise, she would discover her mother had not summoned her merely to say goodbye. She had summoned Clara because there was something she had been hiding for 32 years. Something involving Clara's father. Something involving a missing child. And something that would force Clara to question the one story she had trusted her entire life. If you believe that sometimes a stranger can become the family we never expected, stay with this story. Because this is one of those journeys where the destination matters far less than what the traveler discovers along the way. And here at Heartwarming Tales, we believe the most powerful stories aren't always about people who have everything. Sometimes they're about people who have almost nothing and still find something to give. The road beyond the station became increasingly difficult. Samuel pulled the sled with steady determination. Thomas occasionally pointed toward distant lights in the valley. Clara remained silent. She couldn't stop thinking about the telegram. Her mother had never asked her to come home before. Not once. For 32 years, their relationship had been complicated. Clara had been born in St. Orla. She remembered almost nothing about the village. She remembered a stone house, a blue door, a kitchen window overlooking a field, and her mother's voice. Clara Bell believed she had run out of miracles. She stood beneath the crooked awning of a tiny mountain station, holding a telegram so tightly that the paper had begun to tear between her fingers. There was only one sentence on it. "Your mother has asked for you. Come before morning." Clara had read those words so many times that they no longer looked like language. They looked like a countdown. Her mother had been sick for months, but Clara had been told she was improving. She had believed it because believing anything else was unbearable. Now the station master was shaking his head. "No more trains tonight. But I have to get to St. Orla. The mountain line is closed. My mother is there." "I know. Please. I am sorry, Miss Bell." Those 3 words were almost enough to destroy her. Clara looked down the empty railway line. Snow moved across it like white smoke. She had no carriage waiting outside. No horse. No money for a private driver. And the single friend she had called had stopped answering her messages. Her mother's village was more than 60 miles away. 60 miles through a mountain, past that was already disappearing, beneath the storm. Clara lowered herself onto the wooden bench. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. She had spent most of her life believing tears were something that happened to weak people. Her father had taught her that. "Stand straight," he used to say. "Keep your voice steady. Never let people see you break." But tonight, there was nobody left to impress. She buried her face in her hands. Then she heard the sound of a bell. Not the station bell. A small brass bell. Clara looked up. An elderly man was walking toward her through the snow. He wore a long brown coat, a wool cap, and boots so old that the leather had been repaired with strips of cloth. Behind him was a narrow wooden sled. On the sled sat a boy of perhaps 10 years old, wrapped in a red blanket. The old man stopped when he saw Clara. "Are you waiting for someone?" Clara tried to answer. Her voice failed. The boy looked at her. "She's crying." "I can see that, Thomas." The old man looked at Clara again. "What happened?" Clara wiped her cheeks. "My mother is dying." The old man didn't offer one of those empty expressions people gave when they didn't know what else to say. He simply asked, "Where is she?" "St. Orla." He looked toward the mountains. "That's a dangerous road tonight." "I know." "You have transport?" "No." "Money?" Clara Bell believed she had run out of miracles. She stood beneath the crooked awning of a tiny mountain station, holding a telegram so tightly that the paper had begun to tear between her fingers. There was only one sentence on it. "Your mother has asked for you. Come before morning." Clara had read those words so many times that they no longer looked like language. They looked like a countdown. Her mother had been sick for months, but Clara had been told she was improving. She had believed it because believing anything else was unbearable. Now the station master was shaking his head. "No more trains tonight. But I have to get to St. Orla. The mountain line is closed. My mother is there." "I know. Please. I am sorry, Miss Bell." Those 3 words were almost enough to destroy her. Clara looked down the empty railway line. Snow moved across it like white smoke. She had no carriage waiting outside. No horse. No money for a private driver. And the single friend she had called had stopped answering her messages. Her mother's village was more than 60 miles away. 60 miles through a mountain, past that was already disappearing, beneath the storm. Clara lowered herself onto the wooden bench. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry. She had spent most of her life believing tears were something that happened to weak people. Her father had taught her that. Stand straight, he used to say. Keep your voice steady. Never let people see you break. But tonight, there was nobody left to impress. She buried her face in her hands. Then she heard the sound of a bell. Not the station bell. A small brass bell. Clara looked up. An elderly man was walking toward her through the snow. He wore a long brown coat, a wool cap, and boots so old that the leather had been repaired with strips of cloth. Behind him was a narrow wooden sled. On the sled sat a boy of perhaps 10 years old, wrapped in a red blanket. The old man stopped when he saw Clara. "Are you waiting for someone?" Clara tried to answer. Her voice failed. The boy looked at her. "She's crying." "I can see that, Thomas." The old man looked at Clara again. "What happened?" Clara wiped her cheeks. "My mother is dying." The old man didn't offer one of those empty expressions people gave when they didn't know what else to say. He simply asked, "Where is she?" "St. Orla." He looked toward the mountains. "That's a dangerous road tonight." "I know." "You have transport?" "No." "Money?" Clara shook her head. The old man was silent. Then he looked at the boy. The boy looked back at him. Something passed between them. An understanding Clara didn't recognize. The old man turned to her. "Get on." Clara stared. "What?" "Get on the sled. You can't take me all the way to St. Orla." "No." "Then where?" "As far as I can." Clara looked at the old man's worn boots. "You don't even know me." He smiled sadly. "Neither did the person who once helped me." "Who?" "My wife." Clara didn't understand. The old man adjusted the blanket around the boy. "She taught me something." "What?" He looked directly into Clara's eyes. "Never ask what a desperate person can give you before deciding whether you can help." Clara swallowed. Then she climbed onto the sled. The old man pulled it away from the station. The boy moved over to make room. Clara sat beside him. The little boy studied her. After several minutes, he whispered, "Are you really going to see your mother?" "Yes." "Before she dies?" Clara looked away. "I hope so." The boy nodded. "My father said goodbyes are important." Clara looked at the old man. "Is he your father?" The boy nodded. "His name is Samuel." The old man laughed softly. "And yours?" "Clara." The boy held out his hand. "Tomas?" She took it. His fingers were freezing. Clara squeezed them gently. And as the sled disappeared into the snow, she had no idea that the two strangers carrying her toward St. Orla were about to become part of the greatest secret her family had ever kept. She also didn't know that before sunrise, she would discover her mother had not summoned her merely to say goodbye. She had summoned Clara because there was something she had been hiding for 32 years. Something involving Clara's father. Something involving a missing child. And something that would force Clara to question the one story she had trusted her entire life. If you believe that sometimes a stranger can become the family we never expected, stay with this story. Because this is one of those journeys where the destination matters far less than what the traveler discovers along the way. And here at Heartwarming Tales, we believe the most powerful stories aren't always about people who have everything. Sometimes they're about people who have almost nothing and still find something to give. The road beyond the station became increasingly difficult. Samuel pulled the sled with steady determination. Thomas occasionally pointed toward distant lights in the valley. Clara remained silent. She couldn't stop thinking about the telegram. Her mother had never asked her to come home before. Not once. For 32 years, their relationship had been complicated. Clara had been born in St. Orla. She remembered almost nothing about the village. She remembered a stone house, a blue door, a kitchen window overlooking a field, and her mother's voice singing while she cooked. Then came the accident. Clara had been 6. Her father, Edward Bell, had died when a bridge collapsed beneath his carriage. At least that was the story. After his death, Clara's mother, Margaret, had sent her to live with relatives in the southern city of Marrow. Clara had asked why. Her mother had said, "You deserve a safer life." Clara never understood what that meant. Her mother remained in St. Orla. They exchanged letters. At first, often. Then less frequently. eventually only once or twice a year. Margaret never came to visit. She always had a reason. The mountain roads were dangerous. The weather was bad. She wasn't feeling well. She couldn't leave the house. Clara had grown up believing her mother had chosen the mountain over her. She never said it aloud, but she believed it. Then, 3 months earlier, Margaret became seriously ill. Clara finally returned to St. Orla, but her mother had been too weak to speak much. The last time Clara saw her, Margaret had held her hand and whispered, "There are things you must know." "What things?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it." Clara had laughed nervously. "What truth?" Margaret had closed her eyes. "Your father didn't die in that accident." Clara had thought her mother was delirious. But now she wondered. Maybe she hadn't been. The sled suddenly stopped. Clara looked up. Samuel was staring at the road. "What happened?" "Bridge." "What about it?" "Broken." He pointed ahead. A wooden bridge had partially collapsed beneath the weight of snow and ice. The road beyond was impassable. Clara's heart sank. "How far to St. Orla?" Samuel studied the mountain. "Perhaps 12 miles. "Can we walk?" "With the boy?" Samuel shook his head. Thomas was asleep beneath the blanket. Clara looked at him. "Then leave him." Samuel's eyes hardened. "Never." "I didn't mean abandon him." "I know." He looked around. "There is an old shepherd's path. Can it take us there?" "Eventually." "Then let's go." Samuel nodded. They unloaded the sled. Samuel carried Thomas on his back. Clara carried the supplies. The path was narrow. The wind cut through her coat. For hours they walked. At one point, Clara slipped and fell into the snow. Samuel helped her up. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Then keep moving." She almost laughed. "You sound like my father." Samuel became quiet. "What was he like?" Clara brushed snow from her coat. "I don't remember enough." "That's sad." "Why?" "Because children should remember their fathers." "Not all of us get that." Samuel looked at her. "Maybe you remember more than you think." Clara said nothing. They continued. Around midnight, they reached a small shepherd's hut. Samuel opened the door. Inside was a stone fireplace. He lit it. Thomas woke. "Are we there?" "Not yet." "How long?" Samuel looked at Clara. She answered, "Not much longer." Thomas smiled. "Good." Samuel gave him bread. Clara noticed there was only enough food for one more meal. She broke her own portion in half and gave some to Thomas. Samuel frowned. "You need that." "So does he." "You may need it more." Clara looked at Thomas. "He is 10. Samuel said nothing. Later, when Thomas fell asleep, Samuel sat near the fire. Clara asked, "Why are you traveling through this storm?" "Work." "What kind of work?" "I repair instruments." "Musical instruments?" "No." "Clocks?" He nodded. "Old clocks." Clara smiled. "So you're a clockmaker, among other things. Where are you going?" "St. Orla." Clara looked at him. "Why?" Samuel stared into the fire. "I have business there." "What kind?" "Unfinished business." Clara didn't press him. But Samuel looked at her. "Your mother's name is Margaret Bell?" Clara froze. "Yes." He didn't seem surprised. "How do you know her?" "I've heard of her." "From whom?" Samuel didn't answer. Clara stood. "You know something. Everyone knows someone in a village. You know more than you're saying." Samuel looked tired. "Your mother asked me to find you." Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Before she became too ill to travel, she sent me a letter." "What did it say?" "That if she couldn't reach you herself, I should." "Why?" "She was afraid you wouldn't come." "Why wouldn't I?" "Because she knew what you believed." Clara stared. "What do I believe?" "That she abandoned you." Clara's throat tightened. "Did she?" Samuel looked toward the sleeping boy. "No." Clara sat down. "Then why?" Samuel whispered. "To keep you alive." The fire cracked. Clara stared at him. "What does that mean?" Samuel shook his head. "Ask your mother. She may not survive until I arrive." "Then hurry." Clara looked toward the door. The storm was still raging. Samuel stood. We leave now. They reached St. Orla shortly before dawn. The village looked exactly as Clara remembered it. Small stone houses, narrow streets, snow-covered roofs, a church tower. And at the far end of the village, the blue door. Clara ran. She opened it. Mother! No answer. She rushed through the hallway. A woman was lying in a bed near the fireplace. Margaret Bell. She looked impossibly small. Clara fell beside her. Mother. Margaret opened her eyes. For a moment, she seemed confused. Then she smiled. You came. Clara began crying. You sent for me. I thought you wouldn't. I almost couldn't. Margaret looked beyond her. Samuel stood in the doorway. Their eyes met. Margaret nodded. Thank you. Samuel removed his cap. I promised. Clara turned. You two know each other. Margaret nodded. Samuel saved your life before you were old enough to remember. Clara stared. What are you talking about? Margaret reached beneath her pillow. She pulled out a small wooden box. Open it. Clara did. Inside was a silver pendant. She recognized it immediately. Her father had worn it. She remembered touching it when she was little. Margaret whispered. Your father didn't die on that bridge. Clara's world tilted. What happened? Margaret closed her eyes. He disappeared. Why? Because someone wanted him gone. Who? Silas Vane. Clara frowned. The name meant nothing. Margaret continued. He owned half the mines in the northern mountains. What did father have to do with him? Your father was a surveyor. Clara knew that. He discovered something beneath the mountain. What? An underground water system. Clara frowned. Water? Margaret nodded. Pure mountain water. She paused. But it wasn't ordinary. She explained that the valley's water source was enormous. It supplied dozens of villages. Silas Vane wanted control of it. He planned to divert the water to private reservoirs and sell it back to the surrounding towns. Edward discovered the plan. He intended to expose it. But before he could, he vanished. Everyone assumed he died. Margaret knew otherwise. How? Because he came home. Clara's breath caught. What? 3 weeks after the accident. Where is he? Margaret looked toward the window. He isn't alive. Then what happened? He was captured. Clara stood. By whom? Margaret pointed toward the wooden box. Read the letters. There were 7, all written by Edward. Clara opened the first. Margaret, if you are reading this, they have taken me somewhere I cannot leave. The second, do not trust anyone from Vane's company. The third, Clara must never return to St. Orla. The fourth, if our daughter ever learns the truth, tell her I did not leave her. Clara pressed the letter to her chest. The fifth contained a map. The sixth contained a list of names. The seventh contained only 4 words. Samuel knows where I am. Clara slowly looked toward the doorway. Samuel stood perfectly still. You knew my father? He nodded. Where is he? Samuel lowered his eyes. Dead. Clara's voice broke. How do you know? Because I was there. Samuel sat beside the fireplace. Clara remained standing. Thomas watched silently. Samuel finally spoke. Your father found evidence that Vane's company was going to seize the, mountain water system. He tried to expose them. Yes. They captured him. Yes. Why didn't you save him? Samuel's face changed. I was 27. Clara waited. I had a wife. He glanced at Thomas. And a daughter. Clara understood. What happened to them? My wife died during childbirth. Thomas? No. Samuel looked at the boy. Thomas is my grandson. Clara stared. Where is his mother? Dead. Samuel's voice softened. She died 3 years ago. Clara sat. So you've been raising him alone? Yes. And you still came through a storm to help me? Samuel smiled faintly. Your mother asked. Clara looked at Margaret. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Margaret whispered. Because I was afraid. Of what? That you would go looking for your father. Clara's eyes filled. You let me believe he abandoned us. I wanted you to hate the dead rather than chase the living. Was he alive when I left? Margaret didn't answer. Clara understood. He was. Yes. And I never knew. No. Where was he? Margaret looked toward Samuel. Samuel reached into his coat. He removed a small metal key. This belonged to your father. Clara took it. What does it open? A door beneath the old mill. What is inside? Proof. Proof of what? Who ordered your father's disappearance? Clara looked at Margaret. Her mother was crying now. Mother? Margaret whispered. It wasn't Silas Vane. Clara frowned. Then who? Margaret looked toward the door. The man who inherited everything. Samuel's voice was barely audible. Silas's son. Clara stared. Who is he? Margaret closed her eyes. Your father's closest friend. Clara could not speak. Her father's closest friend? She remembered him. A tall man with a silver pocket watch. Mr. Adrian Vale. He had visited their house often when she was little. He had given Clara sweets. He had taught her how to play chess. He had carried her on his shoulders. When her father disappeared, Adrian had been the first person to tell the village that Edward was dead. Clara suddenly felt sick. He told us father died. Samuel nodded. He knew Edward was alive. Why? Because he arranged it. Thomas looked frightened. Clara went to him. Don't worry. Samuel stood. We need to go to the mill. Now? Before Adrian learns that you have arrived? How would he know? Samuel looked at the snow outside. Because there are people watching this house. Clara's heart raced. How long have they been watching? Since yesterday. She moved toward the window. A figure stood far down the street. The person disappeared behind a building. Clara turned. Then we leave. Margaret shook her head. No. Clara stared. You can't stay. I don't need to. What? Margaret smiled weakly. The evidence is not at the mill. Clara stopped. Then where? Margaret pointed toward the clock on the wall. Clara looked at it. It was an old wooden clock. She had seen it her entire childhood. It had never worked. Margaret whispered. Your father hid the real evidence inside the clock. Samuel walked over. He examined the mechanism, then smiled. Edward was clever. Clara touched the clock. What evidence? A ledger? What does it contain? Every payment made by Adrian Vale. Clara stared. Why would father hide it? Because he knew if the ledger was found, Adrian would be ruined. And the key? Samuel held it up. The key opens the clock. Clara took it. The mechanism clicked. A hidden compartment opened. Inside was a black leather ledger. Clara pulled it out. Pages, names, dates, payments, bribes, and one final entry. Edward Bell, removed. Beside it was a date. 32 years ago. Clara felt the room spinning. Her father hadn't died in an accident. He had been deliberately removed. She turned the page. There was another entry. Margaret Bell watched. Then another. Clara Bell sent away. Clara covered her mouth. Her mother had been watched. She had been sent away to protect her. The entire life, Clara thought had been built on abandonment had actually been built around sacrifice. Then the front door opened. Everyone froze. A man's voice came from the hallway. Margaret. Samuel immediately moved Thomas behind him. Clara recognized the voice. Adrian Vale. He entered the room carrying a black umbrella. He was older now. His hair was white. But Clara knew him instantly. His eyes settled on her. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Adrian smiled. Clara. She stared at him. You knew I was coming. He sighed. I was hoping you wouldn't. Did you kill my father? Adrian looked at Margaret. Margaret looked away. Adrian closed the door. No. Clara stepped toward him. Then who did? I don't know. You expect me to believe that? No. Good. Adrian looked exhausted. I didn't kill Edward. Then tell me what happened. He sat down. My father ordered Edward taken. Why? Because Edward discovered the water project. And you? I was 29. You helped him. Adrian nodded. Yes. Why? He stared at the floor. Because I was afraid of my father. Clara laughed bitterly. So you sacrificed my father? Yes. Why should I care that you were afraid? You shouldn't. His honesty stunned her. Adrian continued. I thought I could undo it later. What happened? My father sent Edward away. Where? An abandoned quarry. Clara's heart pounded. Was he alive? Yes. For how long? 3 months. She stared at him. 3 months? Adrian nodded. I secretly brought him food. Why didn't you free him? I tried. What stopped you? My father threatened to kill you and your mother. Clara felt tears burning her eyes. You let me grow up believing he abandoned me. I know. You let my mother suffer alone. I know. You watched us lose everything. I know. Clara slapped him. The sound echoed through the room. Adrian didn't move. That was deserved, he whispered. Clara raised her hand again. But she stopped. Anger was burning through her. Not the clean anger of justice. The ugly kind. The kind that could consume years. She lowered her hand. Where is my father? Adrian looked at Samuel. Samuel stepped forward. He's dead. Clara looked at him. When? 3 months after his capture. How? Illness. Did he suffer? Samuel's eyes filled. Yes. Clara closed her eyes. Adrian spoke softly. Before he died, he gave me something. What? A letter. Where is it? Adrian reached into his coat. He placed an envelope on the table. Clara stared. Her name was written on it. For Clara, when she is old enough to understand. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her father's handwriting filled the page. My little girl, if you ever read this, then I failed to come home. Clara couldn't see clearly. Tears blurred the words. I want you to know something before you judge me. I did not leave you. I fought to return to you until I could no longer stand. Your mother will tell you that I was brave. Don't believe her. I was terrified. I was terrified of dying. Terrified of never seeing you grow up. Terrified that you would remember me as a stranger. But there was one thing I wasn't afraid of. Loving you? Clara pressed the letter against her heart. She cried openly. Her father had not abandoned her. He had loved her until the end. The letter continued. If the world tells you that your life was ruined by what happened to me, don't believe that either. A life isn't measured by what happens to us. It's measured by what we choose to do afterward. If you ever find the people responsible, don't become like them. Don't spend your whole life trying to hurt people who hurt you. Build something they cannot destroy. Build a life. Build a home. And if you ever find someone who needs help, help them. Because kindness is the only thing fear cannot control. Clara lowered the letter. She couldn't breathe. Thomas quietly approached her. He held out his small hand. Clara took it. For some reason, that simple gesture broke the last wall inside her. She knelt and hugged him. Thomas hugged her back. Samuel watched them. Adrian looked away. The story should have ended there. But it didn't. The ledger was only part of the evidence. The water project was still active. Adrian had secretly continued his father's work for years. He had built private reservoirs throughout the mountains. Villagers had been forced to pay for water that naturally belonged to the valley. But Adrian's motive was not simply greed. He had been trying to maintain the system because he believed destroying it would bankrupt hundreds of families employed by the company. His mistake had become its own prison. Clara discovered something else. The water system could be restored, but it required cooperation from every village. For weeks, she traveled through the mountains. She spoke to farmers, mill workers, teachers, shopkeepers, widows, miners. She showed them the documents. Some didn't believe her. Others were furious. One old farmer said, "Your family has been fighting this battle longer than I've been alive." Clara replied, "Then perhaps we should stop fighting alone." The villages united. They created a cooperative. The reservoirs were opened. The mountain water was returned to public ownership. Adrian surrendered the company's remaining assets. The government eventually intervened. But Clara refused to take the company's money. Instead, she requested one thing. The old Bell mine and reservoir land would become a public trust, a place where families could live without fear of losing access to water. A school would be built there, A clinic. And a workshop. Samuel asked her why a workshop. Clara smiled. For Thomas. Why? Because he likes fixing things. Thomas grinned. I want to fix clocks. Samuel laughed. Then you'll be better than me. Months passed. Margaret's condition improved unexpectedly. The doctors said she had little chance of recovering. But she did. Not completely. She remained weak. Yet she could walk again. She could sit outside. She could laugh. And most importantly, she could finally tell Clara everything. They spent hours together. Mother and daughter. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they sat silently. Clara asked why Margaret never told her the truth. Margaret answered honestly, because I was afraid. Of Adrian? Of everyone. You should have trusted me. I know. You should have let me choose. I know. Clara looked at her. I don't want to spend the rest of my life angry with you. Margaret cried. Neither do I. Clara took her hand. Then we won't. That was their forgiveness. Not dramatic. Not perfect. Just two people deciding they had lost enough time. A year later, Clara returned to the old railway station. The station had been repaired. The tracks were open again. She stood beneath the same crooked awning. Snow was falling. Samuel and Thomas stood beside her. Thomas was older by only a year, but he already carried a small toolkit. You promised me something, he said. What? A clock. Clara laughed. I promised you a workshop. Same thing. Samuel shook his head. He's impossible. Clara smiled. He reminds me of someone. Who? My father. Samuel became quiet. Clara looked at him. You never told me why you helped me. I told you. That your wife taught you? Yes. But that's not the whole story. Samuel sighed. No. What is the whole story? He looked toward the railway. Years ago, when your father was captured, I tried to help him. Clara listened. I failed. How? I was supposed to bring him medicine. You couldn't? I was caught. By Adrian? Yes. Samuel paused. Your father knew I was coming. What happened? He told me to leave. Why? He knew my wife was pregnant. Clara stared. He sacrificed himself. Samuel nodded. Your father told me that if I had to choose between saving him and returning to my family, I should choose my family. Clara's eyes filled. That's why you came for me. Yes. Because you felt you owed him. Samuel shook his head. No. Then why? Because he once saved my life. Clara smiled. How? Samuel looked at Thomas. My wife died giving birth to him. Clara understood. Samuel continued. I couldn't forgive myself. But your father, he told me the child wasn't responsible for the tragedy. Clara looked at Thomas. He told me to raise the boy. Samuel smiled. And I did. Thomas came running toward them. Grandfather! Samuel turned. What? The clock! Samuel sighed. What did you break? Nothing. That's what you said last time. Thomas held up a pocket watch. It stopped. Samuel examined it, then handed it to Clara. Your turn. She looked at the watch. Me? You repair books. That's different. Everything broken has a beginning. Clara smiled. Where did you learn that? Samuel looked toward the mountains. From a man who never came home. 2 years later, Clara opened the doors to the Bell Mountain house. It was part library, part school, part workshop. Anyone could enter. Children learned to read. Farmers learned to repair equipment. Old people brought photographs. Families brought letters. Samuel taught clockmaking. Thomas became his apprentice. Margaret lived in a small room overlooking the valley. Clara kept her father's letters in a glass cabinet. Not because she wanted people to remember the tragedy. She wanted them to remember the choice Edward had made. He had been afraid. He had been betrayed. He had been imprisoned. He had lost everything. Yet his final message had not been revenge. It had been love. One evening, Clara sat alone in the library. A young girl entered. Miss Bell? Yes? Can I ask you something? Of course. Why do you keep old letters? Clara smiled. Because people disappear. The girl frowned. But letters don't? Sometimes they do too. Then why keep them? Clara looked at her father's handwriting behind the glass. Because sometimes a person leaves words behind when they can't leave anything else. The girl thought about that. Then she asked, "Was your father a good man?" Clara paused. She could have said yes. She could have told the child about his courage. Instead, she answered honestly, "He was human." What does that mean? It means he was afraid sometimes. Was he brave? Yes. How can someone be afraid and brave? Clara smiled. That's usually what bravery is. The girl nodded. Then she ran away. Clara looked toward the window. Snow was falling. For a moment, she remembered the night at the station. The broken train. The empty road. Her tears. The old man. The boy. The journey through the snow. She realized something then. She had spent years thinking the most important moment of her life was discovering the truth about her father. But it wasn't. The most important moment had been earlier, when Samuel saw a stranger crying beneath a broken station roof and chose not to walk away. Because without that decision, Clara might never have reached St. Orla. She might never have found her mother's letter. She might never have learned her father's truth. She might never have forgiven her mother. And Thomas might never have found the home he eventually built beside the mountain workshop. One ordinary act had changed 4 lives. Maybe more. Years later, when Samuel was too old to climb the workshop stairs, Thomas took over the business. He became one of the finest clockmakers in the northern valleys. People traveled for days to bring him broken watches. He never charged poor families. When Clara asked him why, he always gave the same answer. "My grandfather taught me that some things are worth more than money." Margaret died peacefully at 83. She spent her final evening beside Clara. She asked to see Edward's letters. Clara brought them. Margaret touched the glass. "Do you still miss him?" "Every day." "Are you angry?" Clara thought. "Sometimes." Margaret smiled. "That's all right." "Mother?" "Yes? I used to think you didn't love me." Margaret closed her eyes. "I know. I was wrong." "Yes." "But I wasn't wrong for believing it." Margaret looked at her. "No." Clara took her hand. "You should have told me." "I should have." They sat quietly. After a while, Margaret whispered, "Did you build your home?" Clara smiled through tears. "I think so." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Then your father was right." Clara laughed softly. "He usually was." "No." Margaret smiled. "He was simply lucky to have a daughter who listened eventually." That night, Margaret died peacefully. Clara stayed beside her until morning. There was no panic. No running. No unanswered train. No storm. Only silence. And love. The following spring, Clara placed her mother's ashes beside Edward's memorial stone. There was no grand ceremony. Only family. Samuel. Thomas. A few villagers. The old clockmaker stood beside Clara. She looked at the 2 names carved into stone. Edward Bell. Margaret Bell. For decades, their names had been connected to tragedy. Now they were connected to peace. Thomas placed a small wildflower beneath the stone. "Grandfather says flowers don't belong in winter." Clara smiled. "Your grandfather says many things." Samuel called from behind them. "I heard that." Everyone laughed. For the first time, Clara felt no weight in her chest. She looked toward the mountain. The water flowed beneath the valley. Children were playing near the school. Smoke rose from the workshop. The clock tower rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Clara listened. Her father had once written that life wasn't measured by what happened to us. It was measured by what we chose to do afterward. She finally understood. Her childhood had been taken from her, but her future had not. Her father had died without seeing the woman she became. But his final words had reached her anyway. Her mother had hidden the truth for years. But she had eventually found the courage to reveal it. Samuel had once failed to save a man, but years later he saved that man's daughter. Tomas had lost his mother, but he gained a grandfather. And Clara, who once believed she had no home, Discovered that home was not always the place where you were born. Sometimes home was the person who waited for you. Sometimes it was the person who carried you through the snow. Sometimes it was a mother who was finally honest. Sometimes it was a father whose final words traveled across decades. And sometimes, home was something you built yourself. One winter evening, Clara found an envelope beneath her office door. There was no name on it. Inside was a single sheet. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Tomas. It was a note written when he was older. Clara, you once asked me why I became a clockmaker. I never told you the real reason. It wasn't because grandfather taught me. It was because of the night he took you through the snow. I was young, but I remember you crying. I remember how frightened you were. I remember how he stopped everything to help a stranger. That night taught me something. A clock measures time, but kindness tells us what to do with it. Grandfather is gone now. Mother is gone too. You are older. I am older. And someday we will all be gone. But that night is still alive. Because you came home. Clara read the final line again. Because someone chose to stop. She folded the letter carefully. Then she walked outside. Snow was falling. The same kind of snow that had once terrified her. But now it looked beautiful. She stood beneath the old clock tower. A child ran past her. Then another. A woman laughed from the bakery. Someone called Thomas's name from the workshop. A bell rang in the distance. Life continued. Clara smiled. She finally understood that miracles were rarely loud. They didn't always arrive with angels or thunder. Sometimes a miracle looked like an old man pulling a wooden sled through a snowstorm. Sometimes it looked like a little boy sharing his blanket. Sometimes it looked like a dying mother finding the courage to tell her daughter the truth. Sometimes it looked like forgiveness. And sometimes it looked like a stranger saying, "Come with us." Clara had once believed that sentence had saved her from missing her, mother's final moments, but now she knew it had done something much greater. It had brought her home. Not just to St. Orla, not just to her mother, not just to the truth about her father. It had brought her home to herself. And perhaps that is why we should never underestimate a small act of kindness. You may think you're only opening a door, only offering a seat, only sharing food, only giving someone a ride, only staying 5 minutes longer, only saying, "I'll help you." But you never know what that moment means to the person standing in front of you. You may be interrupting the darkest chapter of their life. You may be giving them enough hope to take another step. You may be changing a future you will never live long enough to see. Years after Clara's journey, the little railway station at Greywick placed a wooden plaque beside its entrance. It read, "No one should have to face the road alone." Nobody knew who had suggested the words. Clara did. She had asked the station master to put them there. Whenever someone asked her why, she gave the same answer. Because I once needed someone to stop. And whenever visitors asked about the story of the old clockmaker and the woman in the snow, Clara never told them about the ledger first. She told them about Samuel. She told them about Thomas. She told them about a man who had almost no money, almost no strength, and very little time. Yet he saw someone hurting and chose to help. That was the part she wanted people to remember. Not the betrayal, not the greed, not the secret, not even the tragedy, the kindness, because evil had taken decades from her family. Fear had stolen years. Silence had created wounds. But one act of kindness had begun healing what all of those things had broken. And that was why Clara eventually wrote a small inscription above the door of Bell, Mountain House. It said, "When you cannot change someone's past, help them believe in their future." Underneath it was a second line. "And when you have the chance to lead someone home, don't ask what it will cost you." Every person who entered saw those words. Some ignored them. Some remembered them. And some carried them into the world. Perhaps that was how the story continued. Not through books, not through monuments, but through people. One person helping another. Then another. Then another. Until a kindness that began on a freezing night beside an empty railway station traveled farther than anyone involved could have imagined. So if you are watching this story tonight and you feel as though your own road has become too dark, remember Clara. Remember that she once stood alone with nothing but a torn telegram and 3 coins in her pocket. She didn't know how she would get home. She didn't know whether her mother would still be alive. She didn't know the truth about her father. She didn't know that her entire understanding of her family was about to change. She only knew that she had to keep moving. And then someone stopped. That was enough. Sometimes, you don't need to see the entire road. You only need someone beside you for the next mile. And if you happen to be the person who can offer that mile to someone else, please don't walk away. You might think your kindness is small. To someone else, it may be everything. That is what Clara learned. That is what Samuel taught Thomas. And that is what generations after them remembered. Here at Heartwarming Tales, we believe every person carries a story that may be invisible from the outside. The tired cashier, the lonely neighbor, the elderly man sitting quietly, the parent struggling to provide, the child pretending not to be afraid, the stranger standing alone beneath the rain. We don't always know what someone is carrying. So when you have the chance to make their burden a little lighter, do it. Not because they might repay you, not because someone might praise you, not because your kindness will become a story. Do it because they are human, and because one day, you may be the person standing alone beneath the storm. You may need someone to stop. You may need someone to say, "Come with me." And perhaps the kindness you give today will travel through a life you never knew you touched, until, years later, it finds its way back to you, like a letter, like a song, like a light in a window, like a road through the snow, like home. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes kindness still matters. Leave a comment telling us, kindness can change a life, and subscribe to Heartwarming Tales for more emotional stories about family, sacrifice, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. And remember, you never know when the smallest kindness you give today might become someone else's reason to keep going tomorrow. Sometimes the person you help will never be able to repay you. Sometimes you will never see what happened after you walked away. And sometimes you may never know that you saved an entire family. But kindness does not need witnesses to matter. It only needs one person willing to stop. Clara once stood beneath a winter sky believing she had no way home. She was wrong. The road was there. She simply couldn't see it yet. And perhaps that is true for all of us. When the night is darkest, the road may still exist. When the train is gone, another path may remain. When the door closes, another one may be waiting. And when you believe you have nobody, there may still be someone willing to say, "Come with us." That sentence changed Clara's life. It changed Thomas's life. It changed Samuel's life. It healed a family separated by fear and silence. And long after everyone involved was gone, the kindness remained. Because people disappear, houses crumble, railways close, letters fade, clocks stop. But kindness keeps traveling from one heart to another, from one generation to the next, until someone standing alone in the snow finally looks up and realizes they are no longer alone.